Welcome, everyone. You're listening to Nephology, the podcast dedicated to crypto, accounting, business, finance, and much, much more. I'm Joe David, the founder of Nephos Group in Minor. Please note that all conversations recorded are professional opinions, and if you'd like to know more or gain support, please reach out to the team directly. Now on to the next episode. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Nephos Group podcast. We've invited back Alex Garcia from Metabyte Studios. Welcome back, Alex.
Thanks very much, Joe. It was so much fun last time, so I'm really looking forward to this episode as well.
Yeah, likewise. I think both of us could have carried on that last one for hours and hours and hours, but yeah, we didn't want to give our listeners too much pain in their ears. So yeah, good to have you back, Alex. How have you been? Any updates from your side, or just ticking along nicely?
Yeah, good. Things are going well, and we started niching down on something which I'd like to speak to you about maybe towards the latter part of the end part of the episode. But yeah, things have been going well. How about yourself?
Yeah, good. Yeah, I mean, we spoke briefly before we came on air, didn't we? That life is in the fast lane at the moment. So trying to manage all of that, and but it's all good fun, So look, last time we spoke, we touched on pain points we touched on quite a few things, but pain points specifically for Web3 companies, and I think. Interestingly, actually, before we get started too much, we met up last week, didn't we, at the Zebu Live event in London, and I think some of those pain points were addressed there. I think there were some decent conversations around, but I still think that some of the core pain points that we've talked about, and I think that we're going to talk about today, are still lacking in that kind of mainstream, if you want to call it that, mainstream crypto space. So. I think, maybe we can touch on maybe the why, but let's jump in a little bit. So I guess, like you say, we wanted to touch on kind of, I guess, three core areas of pain points for Web3 companies this time around. So and how by us talking about it and giving our opinion, how that can help them to kind of make better decisions when launching a Web3 business or when growing their Web3 business, etc. So do you want to get started on the first one that we kind of discussed, and we'll go from there?
Yeah. No, that's great. Thank you, Joe. So last time we briefly touched upon this idea of project management in Web3. And so, the listeners might be hearing this and saying like, well, why don't you just use Trello, right? Like we have project management tools out there, and that's great. The thing that we've found, and when I say project management Web3, I mean around what I call distributed systems or distributed teams, or DAOs, if you want to get like super technical in one of these niches. It doesn't have to be a DAO. I think just any kind of distributed team, we have different entities, and there's like a fuzzy hierarchy, and there's not a clear leader, not a clear boss who calls the shots and tells people what to do. So the issues you have is like, how do you manage expectations? How do you make sure that everyone aligns on the missions, the values, the utilities, and so on? How do you manage accountability and incentives, right? Like when you have a boss, it's very easy to hire and fire, but when there's this kind of fuzzy hierarchy across the board, it can be very difficult to manage kind of like accountability and incentives. And then also lastly, like who pays for what? That's also a big aspect of this. So the way I see this playing out, and again, this isn't just for decentralized autonomous organizations. I think this is just for distributed systems, distributed teams in general, is this concept of an on-chain MOU, Memorandum of Understanding. Now, that sounds very fancy, right? Like, why would we need this thing to be on-chain? Well, I don't actually think it needs to be necessarily on a public blockchain, right? You could have it on a private blockchain, but I think there is benefit in having this stake in the ground when you're starting off this project, where you can, with some level of immutability, manage all these different things, right? Like, so what are the expectations of each entity in this project? What happens if they achieve these expectations, and what happens if they don't? And having that managed by this almost like programmatically on-chain mechanism would be hugely beneficial when you don't have a boss to call the shots. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, I really so, and I guess what we're talking here is that because my next question was going to be, or the thought in my mind was kind of like, that's all very well and good, but you still need someone to click, move on to the next step. But I guess if you build a smart contract that says once, and this is actually probably not that difficult, once all these are ticked, deploy this.
Yeah.
I guess what you're saying there is what do we call it? Kind of like Gantt chart type thing. Do you know what I mean? Where you're moving through the project. Can be deployed automatically by the smart contract, so no one person needs to control that process. Is that kind of where we're?
Yeah, exactly. I think this is something you could hack together in Google Docs, I guess, right? So you could create like a memorandum of understanding in a Google Doc, and then maybe have an Excel spreadsheet where everyone like gets to vote, like, was this thing done by this entity or by this actor, yes or no, and therefore can we go to the next step, and so on. But you could imagine that being fairly clunky, and it's difficult to like who controls that and so on. So I think just again, like a general meta trend that I see is just better UI and UX, user experience, in these types of products. I think if someone came out with like a very smooth experience where you have this like accountability and incentive mechanism baked in, it would be super valuable.
Have you seen anything? Have you seen anything at all in this space?
So I haven't done any research. It's not something that we're looking to do, but it is definitely a pain point that we had. So we didn't work as a DAO or didn't set up any DAOs, but we were working on as like these distributed teams where you had different entities. You had like outsourced marketing, you had an outsourced creative, would be doing the tech, and so on and so forth. And it was very fuzzy, like who calls the shots, who's the boss, who pays for what, how can we incentivize, and how can we keep people accountable? Like if the creatives aren't pulling their weight. So that was the sort of overall pain point. And that, the moment it kind of like the penny dropped when we thought, well, this seems to be a problem that DAOs try to solve, but it's not just necessarily limited to DAOs, right? It's not. It could just be some kind of distributed project that you're working on.
In principle, though, this is similar to what we briefly touched on last time with regards to decentralization and real decentralization and all that sort of stuff. And you look at I was chatting to someone yesterday who they run a foundation, and they were talking about the director, as in other words, the person who's at the top of the tree, ultimately calling the shots. So, and I think that's again that's the challenge with this decentralization thing is, in principle, is how do you become truly decentralized when ultimately you need somebody, like you say, that pays the bills or whatever, or is the one that's in control of project management, or is the one that is driving forward the strategy, when actually in principle all of this could be done on chain, and the process of that whole business model, if you like, is on chain, built through smart contracts, etc. It's actually a very, excuse the pun, but smart way to really, I think, run a business, because actually you take away human decision making, take away human opinion and all that sort of stuff. And you just go, look, facts are facts. Is this done? Yes or no? Does this move us on to the next point of strategy? Yes or no? I think that's really, really interesting. I also think it's really interesting that we're now talking about, integrating Google Docs and that being clunky, when, only probably 2 years ago, Google Docs was probably absolutely not clunky. It was the latest and greatest. So it's funny how time moves quite quickly, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think Google Docs are fantastic for what they what they're used for. But I think for this kind of thing, you could use it. But I think if you had like a specific application that was just focused on this, and to touch on your point, your previous point, I agree. I think one of the issues with DAOs in general is like who takes initiative, right? Like who drives this forward. And I have seen that with other companies, like other decentralized autonomous organizations, that no one takes any initiative. So like the thing just doesn't move forward. So it's a difficult balance to strike. But I think as almost like a mega trend, I see more and more of these types of systems cropping up. And I think tools that enable and empower these types of systems will do very well.
Yeah, and we've actually had contacts with DAOs when we're looking to bring them on as clients, and they, we've had 3 different conversations with 3 different people who want 3 different things. Who, when we then try and quote them, it's kind of like, well, one person wanted the really simple thing, one person wanted the high end. So when we sent out the quote, for example, the low end person was like, well, hang on, that's far too expensive. The high end person was like, perfect, that's what I want, and then how do you, it's kind of like that, making sure you get to the decision maker type thing in kind of a normal kind of sales process. And I guess the same here, right? You've got to have, like you say, that memorandum of understanding that says that these are the people that are doing these roles and these are the tasks that need to be completed in order to get to here. And I think, I think that's a really interesting point as a pain point.
Yeah, so just some food for thought for listeners, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think jumping on to number 2 that we've pulled out. So we want to talk about licensing in the Web3 world. So let's start with that.
Yeah, so I happen to be a bit of a licensing geek because my first job out of university was in tech transfer. So that means commercializing early stage technology coming out of university by way of spin out company formation and licensing. And so I started out as a market analyst and then went on to be a tech licensing exec, specifically in software. And so I tend to know quite a bit about this. And when we were starting as Metabyte Studio, we were very excited about music NFTs. And now we're sort of pivoted away from that, but I'm still interested in that kind of from a personal perspective. And I don't want to make any enemies on this podcast, Joe. So I'm not going to name names and name and shame or anything like that. But let's just say some pretty prevalent either artists in the space or platforms in the space have some pretty terrible licensing, to be honest. So if you look at, I think 2 big use cases I've seen for music NFTs is distributing these unique stems or tracks that people can then use to like remix and sample and so on. And the second thing is royalties. So you own the NFT and you get paid back some kind of royalty. Generally, it's streaming royalties, which isn't even a huge portion of the pie, but in any case, some kind of streaming royalty back to the NFT holder. And if you go on these platforms, you can find the licenses either on the platforms or attached to the NFT metadata. And they're pretty terrible licensing terms. So it's like in the case of using the NFTs as like samples or tracks, it'll be like, yeah, actually, you still need to get permission for that. And it's up to our discretion whether you can use it or not, and so on. And in the case of royalties, there's like no payment schedule. It's not clear on like, how any of this will get paid out and when. It's kind of like, yeah, we might pay it if we feel like it at some point, maybe, And so I think, just anyone who's in the sort of legal licensing space who just wants to tackle this, I think there's a lot to be said about just better licensing for NFTs on NFT metadata in general. And even if that just means enforcing things manually for a few years whilst the technology catches up, I think that's a big thing to look at. And I think secondly, a follow-up on this is that, when I got into the space, I was really excited about this idea of licensing on chain, right? Like all this like on-chain smart contracts that can execute things based on what happens in the real world, whether it's payment or whatever else. The problem is it still relies on these centralized marketplaces. So for instance, if you launch an NFT project and you want to get royalties off the back of that, you're relying on the likes of OpenSea paying that out. But then people can take those NFTs, take it to SudoSwap, for instance, which is a decentralized exchange, and then not pay any royalties back to the creators. And so now you've like cut out this huge revenue stream for creators or for brands, whatever it might be. And that's because it's ultimately still not on chain. It's still reliant on these platforms. So that's kind of like a meta big idea that I just wanted to kind of throw out.
Yeah, and and some of those bits I hadn't even really thought about, especially taking those NFTs off a centralized platform and taking them onto a decentralized platform that potentially doesn't have, like you say, the same kind of, not responsibility is the wrong word, but you know what I mean? The same rules of engagement, right? So that's really interesting. I think the other thing, and like I say, you don't want to particularly fall out of anyone, so I won't ask you to name any names. But the other thing I think, the crypto or the blockchain music world, right? One of its kind of selling points in inverted commas is that people get paid a bigger percentage of the royalty, and they get paid faster. Like that, that's the, that's a, so I guess are you saying here that actually some of those licenses don't necessarily reflect that reality that these platforms want to achieve? And it's not necessarily because they're trying to be, deliberately, poor, but maybe a lack of knowledge or a lack of understanding of what they've actually built. It doesn't actually reflect reality.
Yeah, so I think there's a 2-part aspect to that. So first of all, for the NFT holder, so the fan that buys the NFT, the fan actually has very limited rights. And you got to bear in mind that that's fair enough, but these NFTs were quite often marketed as being like, okay, now you can be, the next big producer with these NFTs because you can do whatever you want with them, or now you get these royalties with these NFTs just by buying this drop. And the reality of it is, when you actually look into the fine print, that's not the case at all. And I think it's not malicious necessarily. I think it's obviously lawyers trying to back things up. I think the second point around this is from the artist's point of view. It's true that there was this kind of like rose-tinted glasses way of looking at this, where it's like this democratization where now anyone can be an artist and make a living off of this. The truth is, power laws exist in this space just like anywhere else. You have the 1% that do extremely well, and then this long tail that are basically starving and making very little. And that doesn't change. Like Web3 doesn't change that, unfortunately.
Which and again, no one in particular, but again, that is something that I would say that the kind of the music NFT world, if you like, they would have you believe that is changed by this current mechanism. So I think that's a really interesting point. And like you say, I don't think there's any deliberate malicious nature here. I think it's, part of these pain points is us just highlighting some of these issues, rather than necessarily saying, these people are doing bad, don't possibly go near them. We're kind of saying, look, just have a think about this, because actually some of the stuff we've seen from our experience is, I've done a lot less, I must admit, in the music NFT space. So it's less of something that would come to me particularly, but I can totally understand the issue there, and like you say, just something for people to think about. So thirdly, we wanted to talk about BD and marketing, which is definitely a hot topic for a lot of people out there. So let's get started on that one.
Yeah, so I think whilst the first two had some element of tech involved, I mean, it doesn't have to, but I think some level of tech would solve the problem. I think with this one, you don't have to be technical to be able to tackle this. So what I've found being in this space is that and look, we have to call the good with the bad, right? So I think there is a lot of, I guess you could call it nepotism at play. So in this space, it's largely about who you know, especially when it comes to the marketing of these different token economies, right? I think there's the thought leaders in the space who tend to live in their ivory tower, and they talk about these token network effects where people are just naturally incentivized by holding the token to suddenly become these promotional machines. Reality is, we all have busy lives. There's only so much attention that can go around. So you still need to rely on old-fashioned marketing and business development and things like that. Now, what I've found is that it's a very murky kind of area, right? There's these alpha groups that are kind of underground, and not, it's difficult to get into them. It's difficult to see how they operate. There's these, crypto and NFT whales. So basically people who have huge holdings and can basically move the market themselves. You have these influencers who, may be active on social media, and they can influence things. PR, so press kits and those types of distribution channels, and then other kinds of marketing channels. But it's really unclear as to what's actually effective. And I think the people that we've worked with, for the most part, they might have a few connections here and there, but it's really unclear as to what works, what doesn't, and where's the ROI. So I think someone who is maybe a little bit more analytical with this approach, I mean, a great thing would be to simply spend some time to try to get into these different alpha groups and then just vet them and see, what's the ROI for this alpha group? How effective is this? Likewise with these contacts with whales and influencers and so on. And I think the final piece of this is call out market manipulation when you see, and I don't think, regulation needs to step in, but I think just as a community, we should be able to call out when they see some nefarious type of activities where, they're selling it to themselves to make it look like there's more demand and more volume and that kind of thing. And I think just calling that out and vetting these different channels would be hugely beneficial.
Yeah, I mean, do you know what I really, there's two real key things I think in this section for me. The first is, and we just finish first. We'll get my words out here. The first part is on how you ended it there with around marketing regulation, and the FCA or whoever are very quick to go, right, you can't put a poster on the tube that promotes Binance, for example, because they're not regulated. But what they can't / won't do anything about is Mr. Whale over here or Mr. Influencer over here on Twitter, who pumps a project that actually is, for want of a better word, shit. Right. Yeah. So the problem you've got there is you regulate in principle the good, right, or the trying to be good, and you completely unregulate, if you like, the kind of bad. And I think that is something that is really like really interesting for regulators, for marketeers, for all of that sort of thing to really look at and go, how do we, because ultimately what you're doing is pushing people away from, say, Binance. I'm using them as an example, but you're pushing people away from Binance and you're pushing them onto Twitter, to these unregulated, kind of KYC'd accounts. Do you know what I mean?
It's
so you're actually, in a way, doing the opposite of what you're trying to achieve. So I think that's a real kind of interesting dilemma. The other thing is, like you just said, how many people run a proper ROI or have a system to run a proper ROI calculation on what these influencer campaigns can do? Or, if I said to you, I'm not a marketeer, but if I said to you, we're going to run an ad campaign on the London Underground, on the stairs going up and down, right? Escalators, couldn't think of the word then. When you're going on the escalators going up and down, and you see all those posters on the wall, and we're going to run an ad campaign on there for the next 4 weeks in these 4 stations, right? You would, after that, I would say to you, or you would say to me, can I have some ROI, please? You tell me, demonstrate to me where my money has been spent and where it's, whereas I don't feel like, especially ones we talk to, I don't feel like Web3 companies do that when they go down this influencer campaign, or, was there a significant spike in volume on the particular day that this influencer was there? And like you say, was that volume real? That's the other thing, is it's all very well going, oh yeah, there was volume, but was that real volume? Which wallets were being used to do this, that, and the other. And, I think that's a really interesting point that you've touched on there, Alex, that, we won't have time to go through it in significant detail today, but I think that's a really interesting point. And I think for me, out of the 3 so far, that's definitely the one I think is, maybe it's because I'm an analytical finance person, but I think that's the one that really is quite an easy win in a way, to kind of go, well, hang on a second, let's just step back and let's make a bit of analysis of this and make sure what we're doing is actually benefiting us.
Yeah, and I hadn't thought about your point around, regulation on, let's say, the London Underground, but then there's no real regulation on Twitter, right? And actually, there's so much action on Twitter and so much, so many scams and stuff going on there. So that's also a really, really good point I hadn't really thought about. So that's interesting.
So yeah, I mean, they were our 3 pain points that we kind of picked out, if you like, from a bunch, to be honest. But to really kind of get people thinking, and obviously, if people want to talk further, they can reach out to you or I, Alex, to do that. But I also know we wanted to kind of flip the podcast on its head a little bit, didn't we, towards the end here? And we kind of wanted to go, well, hang on a second, let's actually have a bit of a session where we have 5-10 minutes now where we just talk through some bits and pieces for your business, and our experience, and see how we can, by talking these things through, how we can maybe help you, and therefore obviously help the listeners. So I'll hand back over to you, and you can kind of touch on the first subject.
That's great. Yeah, Joe, I appreciate it. I know we're running low on time, so I'll try to be brief. But so I heard about this great concept, which is like, what's a great way to either start a business or streamline your business is, and we mentioned this last time, like you look at your own spending. What's another way of doing this? Well, you ask your accountant, right? Because your accountant can see everyone's books and they know who's making money and who isn't. So it's so I'm going to be selfish and like hijack this part of the podcast and get some of your special insights. And I know you, Joe, also offer advisory type services and things like this. So I think it's like just a natural fit. So I think there's like a 3-part question that I had, and I don't know how much time we have, but the first thing I wanted to ask is, based on your experience, like what type of businesses in and around Web3 or just software applications in general have you seen working really well?
So I think for me, and this is a really obvious thing to say, and this may or may not help you because you might think it's obvious too, but the ones that work well are the ones that run their business like a business. The ones that actually say, do you know what? Yes, I'm a crypto company, and yes, this is a stereotype, but actually, do you know what? This is a proper business. I'm trying to run this like a proper business, and I think that's the first kind of key section, if you like, of how people, I see are succeeding. The others that, and again, the others that are offering bits that we're talking about here. So actual tangible value to what their customers need. So again, I would say you guys are offering a tangible support to clients. You're not just creating another exchange or another, this, that, or the other where there's loads of. You've actually got real advice in here, real thoughts in here that you want to advise. So for me, the biggest kind of sectors that work well are those two, the ones that actually go properly business like, and the ones that have real tangible value to offer to their customers.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's really cool. And in terms of, I think more specifically, there's this dichotomy that we've been kind of struggling with a little bit. So, and it's the software, but sorry, the services versus product. So you can kind of do software licensing versus software as a service. And on the one camp, you're basically developing stuff and basically just trading your time for these services. On the other hand, you're developing something that's more scalable. So there's more like potential upside down the line, but it's also more difficult to hit that, hit that home run.
Mm-hmm.
I think it doesn't have to be this dichotomy. There's probably like a healthy blend of the two, but is there anything you could advise in terms of maybe which camp to go down based on what you've seen, or any thoughts on that?
Yeah, again, I think it depends on the sector as well. And I don't just mean like whether it's crypto or not. I mean the sector within crypto as well, because or blockchain. Because again, we have a couple of solutions that we offer where you would argue it's a kind of software as a service type thing, where we're effectively kind of buying / white labeling the ability to perform a service that without that software it would take us much longer to perform, right? So what we still have there is knowledge. So we still have the knowledge to do what we've got to do, but we are kind of licensing that software to be able to do it. So I think that is a good opportunity if you hit the nail on the head on a market that is actually a real need for that business sector. So for accountants, for example, it might be, I don't know, a training system for crypto accountants or something like that. I can't think of a good example. Now, if that sector is really buoyant and active and whatnot, I think just selling a training course probably won't get you anywhere, because actually people want to be able to then deliver it themselves in their own way with their own logos on it, et cetera, et cetera. Whereas if you said, look, we've created a podcasting studio thing like this Riverside system we're on, then what benefit are you going to have with software as a service? What you need to just do is package it up and say, here you go, guys, go do it. This is the cost of it. Go do it. But like you said, you've really got to hit the nail. You've got to do something that is kind of out there, if you like. You've got to do something that really changes the way people work and the way people think. So again, I think for me, it's what are you looking to do? What is the what is the ultimate goal for you as a business, and what type of customer are you trying to hit? And I think you'll kind of get that answer from that question, if that makes sense.
Yeah, look, I find it's almost really easy when you're the armchair quarterback or whatever the term is, and you're kind of from the sidelines, you're saying, oh, that pitch deck sucks, or your strategy is terrible, or you're not niching down enough. But then when you're actually in it, you have like real implications to all these decisions that you're making. And I think this whole concept, I think also niching down in general, it's a tough one, because you want to niche down, you want to be a specialist. I mean, a good analogy I have for this is like, what's your favorite restaurant, Joe? Just to kind of drive this point home.
Just for ease, but it probably is Nando's.
Nando's, okay, perfect, right? So you go to Nando's to have like a chicken burger or like some kind of chicken based dish. You don't go there to have pizza. You don't go there to have sushi or anything else, right? So they do something specific, and they do that well. And I think it's the same with business, right? So if you try to please everyone, you end up pleasing no one at all. And also, so I think it's quite easy for software development agencies or firms, consultancies, to claim they can do anything, and then they actually struggle because no one's even going to pin them to anything. They're not going to go to them because they don't have any level of specialization. One of the things that we've been seeing some interest in, and so we're kind of going down this route right now, is to be a technology partner for the seamless Web3 tokenizing of physical goods, specifically around retail. So that's like the niche that we're now looking at. So tokenization of retail goods and a seamless Web3 experience. Is a very open-ended question. Like, what are your thoughts on that? Is this a good niche to go down, or do you recommend something else, and why?
Do you know, it's really, again, a really interesting one, because if you had spoken to me 18 months, 2 years ago, and you had said to me, Joe, I think you should niche your business into this particular sector, I'd have told you to go away. I'd have said, look, there's absolutely no chance that I'm limiting my market to a smaller audience when I could have a bigger audience. And then lo and behold, I niched myself into the crypto world. And not only did my business grow and our connections and all those sorts of things, but funnily enough, my market got bigger. So this market I thought that was going to get smaller actually got significantly bigger because I became an expert in that field, and people came to me not just because I was an accountant, but because I was a crypto person. And now, don't get me wrong, I'm not. Anyone that tells you they know everything about crypto, they're lying, because I think it's impossible. But as far as knowledge goes in terms of the technical aspects of crypto, I'm pretty good, right? And that for me has allowed me to have conversations with we're talking to a few top 50 kind of crypto projects at the moment around their finances and accounts, and how we can support, and to be able to go to them and say, look, you don't need to go and hire this high level CFO. Come to us. We can do that job for you. We can deliver that strategy. We can deliver the crypto, because I've niched so much into it. So our market has gone from being general and therefore kind of not non-existent, but kind of, do you know what I mean, really difficult to identify, to we've now got this huge growing market of crypto that is now kind of much easier for us to kind of go and talk to, and to sell, if you like, our services. So my first comment on niching is, like I said, 2 years ago I would have said no, and now I'd be like 100% you've got a niche. And actually anyone that, so let's take Nando's as that example, right? You can go to Nando's, you know what you're getting. You go to, sometimes I like going to, or as a team, say we're having some food, we're getting a Deliveroo in the evening, right? And we just want to get it from the same place. We might go to somewhere like, I don't know, I can't think of one, but Zzz's or something like that, right? Because you can pretty much get anything there. You get pizza, pasta, etc. So sometimes you do need a broad range, because you need to be able to service a lot of customers in one go. But a lot of the times you need to go, do you know what? We're going to do one thing and we're going to do it bloody well. And when we do it well, we're going to absolutely smash it out of the park. And I think that's really important. As to specifically whether, I think the tokenization of real world assets is the way that the blockchain and crypto needs to start going. I had this conversation on another podcast the other day, which hopefully we'll get. I'm not sure when it's going out, so I'm not sure if it'll be before or after this. But tokenizing real world assets is in the proper way, I think, is absolutely a fantastic option. Whether retail, I'd have to hear more about the business proposition, if you like, to see whether retail is the right answer for that. But I absolutely think that tokenization, and therefore allowing what I would say is like, what's the word? Kind of part ownership. So you don't, all of a sudden now you don't have to own. Let's take a Lamborghini in typical crypto style, right? So let's say there's 20 of us that want to own a Lamborghini, but none of us A, want to buy it, B, can afford it, C, would drive it all the time. So what we do is we pull together, we tokenize that Lamborghini. So Lamborghini now create this tokenized Lamborghini that is shared ownership on the blockchain by 20 of us, that can be used through a booking platform. And the way you verify your ownership is by, connecting your wallet and verifying an NFT or whatever it may be that kind of verifies your ownership in that asset. You book it in and you can go and use it for that weekend. Like, there's an example in my eyes of tokenizing a real world asset, but are still allowing that verification of ownership and all those bits and pieces. So I think there's absolutely a space for that. It's just getting that niche bit right, I guess, within that niche, if that makes sense.
Yes, absolutely. This is great. Joe, I know we're way out of time, so I really appreciate the help, and this is a lot of fun, and I hope your listeners also get some value out of this.
Yeah, likewise, and thanks again for having you. We'll hopefully have you on again before the end of the year, to have another catch up and another chat. But again, just quickly, for those that didn't maybe listen to the first one, where can they find you?
So we're at Metabyte Studio across all socials, so LinkedIn, Twitter, and so on. And just reach out if you have any questions, want to discuss anything in more detail. Always happy to have a chat.
Yeah, perfect. And we'll put all those in the description as usual. Alex, absolute pleasure as always. Absolutely love our chats every time we have them. So, like you say, hopefully people got value from that, and we'll definitely catch up again soon.
Thanks a lot, Joe. This is great.
Take care, buddy.
Cheers.